Okay, so since I've got an introduction, I will get right into it. I should share my screen. Hold on. Share screen. Yeah, do you see the image? Cool. Okay, so this is an installation that I did in late 2018. It's called Rigor Mortis, and I did this in Kochi, which is a town in the south of India and along the coast. And while I was working on it, I was there for a month and a half putting it together. So some of the work was existing objects that I had gathered over the course of my MFA that I had just finished. So I collect, I was living in a region that was once the wetlands in rural Uttar Pradesh, which is in Dadri, which is a town in rural Uttar Pradesh, close to Delhi, like a suburb close to Delhi, which is where my university was. So I used to collect things while exploring the region on foot, and our campus was also kind of built on what was once rural farmland. I was generally interested and involved, interested in the history of like how the campus came into being, and the way the land was acquired and stuff, which has its own like contentious kind of history. I think a lot of what I do is kind of informed by that landscape, which is why I mention it. So some of these objects that I collect were discards that were on campus from like what they do to mow the lawns or like prune the trees, and basically clean the place up. And they were usually like things that were like pieces of bark or seeds and pods shed by trees and so on, sometimes even bones and snake skin. So there was a lot of wildlife on campus as well, and and a lot of stray dogs that I spent a lot of time rescuing. So because the campus authorities were cruel to them for various reasons, wanted them out. So a lot of why I work with this, I think at the time I was interested in this idea of, well, not really interested, but preoccupied with this sense of loss, at the time I referred to what I was doing as a rehearsal of loss. So this interest in perishable organic material came from that fear or anticipation of loss, I'd say. So this installation was in Kochi, and here it used some of the objects that I already had, and I made a series of drawings while I was there as well. So during the floods, I think I spent a lot of time right behind this room is the seashore. There'll be an image of it maybe later on. And so during the floods, there's a lot of stuff that kind of washed ashore. So I picked up some of those objects, again from the sea, and they kind of became a part of this installation. Let me full screen this. Here are some of them. So like these are pieces of plaster, they're molds, and some of them have objects in them, embedded in them. This is like glass, and I had these iron stands made for them. So after the objects were made, this is a video projection of a video of something that I shot behind this room, which is of a rock being weathered by the sea, and it had shells and stuff that had gotten stuck to it and become a part of the object. So I placed a piece of plaster there that I had poured on the seashore. So it's a piece of plaster that has collected sand and shells, and so this video was projected on it, and the object coincidentally looked a lot like the rock that was being weathered, because it had the same, because it was made of similar elements. And these bits of glass are bits of glass that I found in an aquarium shop close by. It had been discarded, so I picked it up. So this is like an aquarium, and on these bits of glass, I've engraved some of the drawings of the sea. So these drawings appear as shadows. I don't have details, which I don't know if I can zoom in while I'm full screen. Okay, never mind. I don't think it, okay, yeah. I mean, you can't see much, but sorry. You could, I mean, you just see these drawings as shadows. That's all I want to show. And it's similar with some of these pieces of glass. How do I go next? Yeah. This is part of the process while it was being made. These are the kind of stands that I had made for the different bits of glass. So the idea of these iron stands was like I nearly had them made to lift these objects off the ground. And then this is a pillar that I covered in paper mache. This is like behind this is like the right here is the sea, and this is where I was making most of these objects. So all of the plaster kind of had took on the quality of this space. I mean, of this bit of sand. Sorry. So that was the idea to some extent. These are the kinds of things that I made. So some of them have like I've used some of the objects that I'd even collected in the past. I've kind of stuck them onto the glass with paper mache. There's pieces of bark, and there's snake skin, and there's beehives, and so on. So it's like this attempt to like naive attempts at preservation almost. That's how I was seeing it at the time. And then I was trying to grow moss in the room, but that didn't really work out because I left for Beirut and they needed constant watering and moisture. So they all died by the time the exhibition opened. But those were things that I was trying to do. This was a video. This was the video. It just had an image of it, so I done. So then we move on to the next one, which is my project in Beirut. I did the home workspace program at Ashkal Alwan, and that was a 10-month program. So a lot of it was spent attending workshops and seminars, but alongside this, there was, we were also kind of accumulating ideas and work, I'd say. So I mean, this video has been put up online, but I will show it to you anyway because it's a minute. And I think it's yeah. The sound. So I'd basically spent, I think here I was interested in, I was primarily interested in this relationship between soil and water. And I was trying different things where I was in a sense, mediating a relationship between them and between these two elements. Sorry? Is there... Yeah, so I was mediating a relationship between soil and water, and I think I was interested in this idea of how water draws attention to itself when it's either in scarcity or in excess. So the idea of a drought and a flood, and I was basically carrying forward this idea of the flood, which I began being interested in while in Kochi. Mostly because a lot of, the floods in Kochi and even like floods that happened in other parts of the country were kind of primarily owing to the fact that, the way in which the cities have developed and the kind of acquiring of low-lying land and so on, these areas being developed and delayed in the opening of the floodgates and stuff. So it's like this these built spaces and how they kind of amplify natural disaster. So that's why I was interested in soil and water down that way. And so so here for this install, basically I shot a video in this area in Beirut called downtown, where there's a built area. It's been built over, I think it was a landfill, and it's a concrete space, and right under it is the sea. It marks the space, the end of the sea and the start of like the built space. So there's this cavity under the bridge that one walks on or jogs on, that where the sea kind of lashes against the end of a wall, basically. And that's the video that I shot, and I saturated it, like made it basically black and white, and I slowed it down. So it was about I slowed it down, and I think the crashing of the waves. And then there were pieces of glass, that had drawings engraved on them of the sea again. They're just line drawings. So the projector was kind of reflecting. The projector here was projecting through these glass surfaces. So that's how the shadows would kind of appear as lines sometimes. And they were being projected on a wall and also being reflected in different parts of the room. So it was totally spread out in that sense. Yeah. And then this was a water tank which had a pump and some soil and lots of water, more water than soil. And this pump was powered by an Arduino. The idea was that the pump would kind of go on every time, before the sediments would fully settle. So the water was constantly being disturbed. And the sound in the room, the sound was lent to the room by a contact mic that I attached to the bottom of this tank. So the sound that you hear is basically the sound of the water pump disturbing the water here. And these are the engraving bits, some of them, while they were being done. This was the state, this was how the studio was before, by the end of the 10 months. This was my corner, kind of spread out, and had these stands made again. And then this large piece of cloth, fabric with soil on it, was what the main screen was, in a sense. And then this was the area that I was working in. So these were the kind of different water soil experiments, I could say. So, yeah. And then I move on to, yeah, this is another that I did while I was there. It's a longish video, so I'll just run you through a little bit of it. The drawings, the kind of drawings that were on the glass, basically. Here I've done them on gateway sheets and like tracing paper and kind of overlaid them. So this is just something that I'm trying, where I'm trying to see how these drawings could exist. So I'm trying to figure out if I can, work with drawing as video. So this is just like a rough idea as to how these particular series of drawings could be shown, maybe. Where they kind of exist in this state as opposed to exist as drawings. And it goes on kind of like this. Yeah. And after my time in Beirut, basically was in this transition phase, moving back and for the first time outside of an institution. So I've been working on this series of drawings. It's basically because of the fact that I kind of have the time to and haven't really figured out what my relationship to drawing is. And I wanted to see where it would take me. So I'm working on the series of drawings, and now like with the lockdown, all the more reason why to work on them. So this is a series of drawings that I began, I think, while I was in Beirut, and then I'm continuing to work on here. The last part of, once the program was done, and then now I'm continuing to work on. So these are like, it started off as these drawings of like small objects that are kind of blown up. So this here, what you see here is what the object is. And then I was also interested in, because I work with material, I was also interested in drawing the material that I work with to kind of understand the material through this process of drawing, in a sense. And the kind of stuff, I think another part, like I think for a while now, the kind of things that I've been drawing are objects with deep crevices. So it's kind of the movement of these crevices, and it's also in a sense the formation of these that movement or these crevices also kind of, in some of them, especially like this shell, it kind of marks the formation of this shell, because this isn't a single shell, but it's like a few shells kind of merged into one, a few sea objects merged into one. This is another drawing of bark again, and then there's this, which was a termite mound that I found in my drawer once I came back. So with this one in particular, I'd say that, or even the previous one, I'd say that like the drawing kind of begins with the object, but eventually isn't really true to the object. It kind of takes on its own course. So it's more like an imitation of the form of the object and the kind of what it's made of, in a sense. And then drawing has its own materiality as well. So it's something I'm thinking about. It's kind of hard for me to talk about exactly what these drawings are doing, because I don't have enough distance from them yet. But I also see them as becoming a part of these installations, with where these drawings, rather than being mounted on a wall, kind of have this clunky stand and glass on them, and the glass has engraving, and the engraving has these drawings that kind of continue as shadows on them. These are just plants. I don't think I should talk about them just yet. This is of a tree stump that had been cut that I found in a park. So it's again like different. I think there's two trees, one tree kind of consuming the other, like growing around the other. So there's two trees in one, and the stump kind of is one object, one block. And this is incomplete. It's something that I'm working on now. And this is again like the first. It's this little object that you see here. But I've kind of really zoomed into it this time. And I think there's also some of it that's like it's different surfaces of the object as opposed to, you know, really, yeah, it's like also some parts of it are like the underside, some parts of it are a corner that isn't actually, I mean, this is actually here, but some parts of it are corners that aren't actually there and kind of make up so yeah, I am done. And yeah, that's it. I don't know how long I took. Too little or too long?
That was perfect, Veda. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's open the mic up for questions and comments from the attendants.
Well, I have a question.
Yes.
Hi, Veda. Hi.
Hi.
Well, I'm really interested about your work, and I always see in common between us, especially in the drawings and the time that you took in it, and I really feel you like. But the question is, I'm really interested about the installation, and it's really interested, and I wanted to ask, how do you organize, because there's a lot of work of scenography I see. It's a whole like word that you work on, and you talked about the fragments and the objects in it, but how do you work on the sonography of the whole thing and the relationship between the objects in it and the work in it, and even the place is really interested. How do you choose the place and all of that, and how do you organize all the scenography in it?
When you say the place, you mean where the objects are placed, or?
For the installation, how do you choose the place you work on, and how do you work on the relationship, where to put things together, why this here and why not here, all that stuff?
So I think to a large extent, I'd say that the second installation that I showed you, where I displayed it, happened to be my studio itself. And the first one was a space that I was invited to show in. And I think, you know, like I don't necessarily plan where what is going, or even what, while I'm working on the thing, like say the duration of 10 months, I'm just making things. And I mean, it works differently in both cases, yeah, but I'm making things and I've spent that much time there, and there is all I know is that there is an engagement, and there are these common elements that kind of keep recurring. And it's kind of like almost like, you know, the parts of the like the little itsy bitsy things that I'm working on kind of become this, they're like the organs, and they become this body, or they come to life when they are like when they come together as an installation. So the placement is something that I mean, it's hard to, I'd have to explain exact decisions, maybe like what I thought of when this went here and this. There's not like necessarily a set rule, but I think it all happens quite organically, having spent a certain amount of time in the space and working in the space. So because the display space in both instances were my studio, were the same space in which I produced the work, the scene kind of, the scenography aspect of it kind of, it happens because of that relationship, I'd say, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know about the snakes, because it's really interesting, and how does it affect your work? And do you play on the hazardous forms that came in, or how does it affect your work?
The snakes.
Yeah.
Oh no, the snakes are just like in the area around which I worked in. So they weren't in the space. I usually what I get in the space are cats, and they poop in them because there's so much soil everywhere. Cats and dogs come to pee and poop. That's about it. No other hazard. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Veda. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I suppose I was wondering about the your use of sort of transparencies in your work there as well. If you could explain a bit more where you're using projection, and then this sort of etching into glass and then projecting drawings through that as well. But even also your drawings have this sort of slight transparent quality to it as well. So that layering over sort of transparencies as well.
Yeah, I think, well, initially glass kind of came in as a viewing surface, like a surface through which to view things from, like even like a magnifying glass or a glass. And like initially it came as like I was merely using it as something that allows you to see an object but not touch it. So the way a museum uses glass is how I was using it. And then when I decided to take the actual object away from the glass, I made this decision to draw on the, so first it was this viewing, so there was glass and the object there, and the object is fixed onto the glass with paper mache, so you see the object as is. And then it became like glass, an object, and you view the object through its shadow. So all you see is the shadow, but not the object. And then the shadow kind of became, okay, if I'm putting the object there, let me, instead of having the object, let me draw on it. And the drawing came about because there was this trying to draw the sea live, and the sea is like these waves constantly moving. And when you make a drawing, there's a still point that you start drawing from. But when you're trying to draw something like water and it's moving, there's no fixed point you can begin with. So my drawings of the sea were kind of happening as quickly as each wave would kind of reach the shore. And there were like 10 drawings, and there's like 10 waves, that might have come towards me. So the first installation that I showed you, that's where I was doing these sea drawings. So there it was this failure to draw the sea in a sense. So that's why those drawings were like awkward squiggly lines that I projected as shadows to kind of show this failure. And then at the same time, there were these shell objects that were around, which were weathered by the sea and kind of had the same quality of lines that I was attempting to draw, but like the process of weathering, consistent weathering kind of takes on the weathering happens in that kind of movement, so these drawings are basically that movement. So I think the glass was, so the engraving, the glass was it kind of takes on this trajectory of first was, I'm not sure I fully answer your question.
No, it's interesting.
So it's like
to hear what you have to say.
So then it's also the shadow and stuff, and then the projection, also these reflections.
It's just interesting in that quality where it's objects that are very present, but then others that are almost sort of, they're almost not there, in that they're shadows or sort of you're refracting projections through glass to distort it as well. So it's interesting how you're working with that.
Okay, Veda, I have a question for you if nobody else has any comments or questions. Okay, what is your connection to the environment? How does it work in the context of the city? Do you investigate any historical or political or cultural references?
I mean, each context has its own kind of interest. I mean, has its own in each of the instances I've shown you. I think they're very different contexts. So, like the first one is very much to do with this relationship between. I mean, this. I think a lot of what I do comes from this having lived in suburban India, the suburbs in India, where you kind of see these ambitions, these developmental ambitions, and like you kind of see them fail and kind of like say like riverfront project or like the building up of a dam, like where there is I think in these suburbs it's most apparent the kind of environmental problems that these things pose. This kind of pace of development and its intentions and stuff of how little it has to do with, especially like say in the Dadri wetlands where my university was. The relationship between like say the university authorities and the immediate surroundings. I think. I mean, there's such a stark difference where like the moment you step out of campus, it's a totally different world where it wasn't safe for us to kind of because it's an area that has its own kind of macho presence, and it was unsafe for a lot of. I mean, it was unsafe for like students to be doing their thing like drinking or whatever. So you know, there's this university campus was like this 56-acre bit of land that's like a total bubble that has nothing to do with the space around it, you know, and inside it it's like super pruned and more lawns are mowed and trees are pruned and everything, and then right outside of it there aren't the resources to do these things. So I mean, I think there's this contrast or this thing that becomes apparent that I think my work kind of, or my responses kind of come from this noticing how apparent these distinctions or this thing is, you know. I don't know. So I think in like my work here was kind of to do with that, and then in Beirut it was like a totally different context. But again, I'd say there, like even the work kind of takes on this kind of form here that I was working on was kind of more organic, and there it kind of has this construction-y kind of sharp angle element that came into it. So that's to do with kind of moving to a city, and I think for a long time it was hard for me to get used to, I mean, work in that context or get a sense of what the context was. So I think that there a lot of elements kind of got taken away, I'd say. And then you just have like these surfaces of glass that almost appear invisible when they're resting on those stands, and those stands are kind of sturdy. Whereas here there's like weird shapes and stuff that are resting on these stands. Yeah.
Well, I've got a little question here, because I think you work a lot on movement and metamorphosis on your work, and I wanted to know about this culture that you're working on. Do you work on the metamorphosis of that objects as organic objects? Do you work on them later, or do you see how do they interact with time or something like that? And in your work with soil, how do the concept of metamorphosis works on it? I don't know if it makes sense. Well, about this culture and the objects are you working? Do you consider them as organics that takes a metamorphosis in time, or when you're done from then you're done?
No, I think they are deliberately objects. I wouldn't say metamorphosis as much as I'd say decay, but they are objects that are likely to perish. perishable objects. Like a lot, some of I even have, I don't know if it was clear in any of the images, but there's also like some amount of like sawdust that I've worked on, like dust and these patterns of dust that can just like blow away with the wind. So then there's like this, of course, there's this deliberate selection of these kinds of objects that are likely to perish, and then imposing them on elements like glass and plaster that are likely to last longer. What was your question again?
I was asking about those sculptures that you use. Do you consider them as organic objects? And do you work on how time affects them, and how do they transform in time? And do you work on their cycle of life, for example, or when you're done with that installation, you move on something else, or you work on those organic, I'm calling them organic sculptures. You work on them later or no?
No, they've kind of, I think, so far, none of them have gotten to, they have not really, once the installation is done, they kind of just exist in the state that they're in. But during the course of like, say, the previous one, there was some amount of watering that was happening, and some of the plants, the soil on the floor, the plants were growing, and the soil that was embedded in the glass, there was stuff that was growing out of it. And then even in the past, there's like some amount of growth of mold and stuff that I encourage to some extent. But then, say in the last one, like with the use of soil on cloth, those things don't last, they kind of crumble. And even the fabric kind of has degraded and stuff. I don't have those work with me. They've been left behind, but that's just incidental. But yeah, I'd say I stop working on them once I'm done.
Okay.
Or haven't really had the chance to continue to work on them, I'd say. Yeah, that possibility still exists.
Looks like this is it. Thank you so much to our 3 artists today for their fascinating presentations and a great discussion.